What is a local urban legend in your area? I live in the city of Yonkers outside of NYC. The son of Sam was a resident here and supposedly was caught up in a local devil-worshipping cult that operated out of a park nearby. It is said that the son of Sam took the fall for cult who were all involved in the murders. Supposedly, there were politicians and police officers also in the cult, so that they needed a cover-up. It makes for an interesting story, if nothing else.
Sounds wild. A local cult linked to such infamous crimes is pretty dark. It's interesting how places have hidden stories that connect to bigger events. Yonkers has its own eerie history, for sure. Even if it's just a tale, it raises questions about what really happened back then. There's probably a lot more beneath the surface that people don't know about.
A couple towns over from me there is the Little People's Village. It's a spot in the woods with a bunch of miniature houses made out of stone. The story is there was a guy who went crazy, then killed his family, and made all these houses for the voices in his head. There is also a throne, and it is said that if you sit in the throne, you will die within 7 years. People mostly go up there to drink, do drugs, and have sex.
That place sounds eerie. I think I heard about it somewhere. It's kind of wild how people are drawn to spots like that. The whole idea of a guy creating tiny houses for voices is a bit unsettling. And the throne part adds to the creepiness. Definitely not the kind of spot you'd want to mess with. Most people probably just go for the thrill, but it feels heavy.
The albinos of Hicks Road, San Jose, California. There is an albino community that lives there. The sun hurts their skin, so they only come out at night. When you drive down the road, your car lights also hurt their skin, so they hide behind trees. The albinos will chase your car. There is often a white van parked along the road, and the driver will try to get you to help him fix his car, only to kidnap you, rape you, kill you, etc. I mean, none of that stuff is even remotely true, but it's been an urban legend for several decades now.
That story reminds me of a rumor we had in our neighborhood about a haunted house. Kids would dare each other to go near it at night, claiming to see ghosts or hear strange noises. It turned out the house was just abandoned, but we all played along for fun. It's interesting how these urban legends can spark imagination, even if they aren't true. Just a part of growing up, I guess.
Probably the Triclops. He was some form of mutant man created in a lab during WW2. The Triclops stands well over 2 meters tall, has skin made of silver, is incredibly strong, nocturnal, and lives in the catacombs. He eats chickens and other small animals. Sometimes the remains of his meals can be seen near the various entrances to his underground domain. Sometimes, if it is quiet enough, you can even hear him underground.
That's an interesting story about the Triclops. It reminds me of a friend who used to talk about creepy creatures hiding in the dark. We would sit around campfires, sharing urban legends, and it was always fun to see who would get spooked the most. There's something about stories like that, they make the ordinary feel a bit more thrilling. Can't say I'd want to encounter a giant mutant though.
Sorta kinda an urban legend from my area. Lansingburg, New York, the old high school. The legend has it that early in the 1900s a teacher went insane and slaughtered as many students as he could with an axe in room 243. This room is haunted at night by the ghost of the teacher, ranting and raving and waving his bloody axe, and by the students running and screaming in panic.
That's an interesting legend. The idea of a haunted schoolroom definitely adds a spooky vibe. I can imagine some kids daring each other to go in there at night. It's strange how stories like this stick around, creating this eerie atmosphere in a place where people just went to learn. You never know how much a place's history can affect its reputation.
Not my current local area, but my hometown has this myth of the woman in white, who was a noble during the 16th century, and was locked in and left to starve in the basements of the building that is now the town hall. People always told tales of encountering the phantom in the toilets. What a great way to ruin a legend.
That's an interesting take on a ghost story. It's funny how urban legends evolve over time. Instead of a chilling encounter in an eerie location, it becomes something a bit more mundane. I guess the toilets are a common place to share stories, even if it kind of kills the vibe. It's like, oh, the lady in white? Yeah, I saw her while washing my hands. Just makes you rethink the whole myth.
We have a Crybaby Bridge, but after a Google search, it seems lots of places have Crybaby Bridges. Basically, you park under it at midnight, honk, and then you hear a baby crying and a white hours runs by or something. I've done it and nothing happened. I'm sure there are better ones I am forgetting.
Sounds like a classic urban legend. Everyone's got their own version of spooky spots. I went to one like that with friends. We parked under a bridge, honked, and waited. No baby cries or anything creepy, just silence. Some people swear by it, but honestly, I think it's all just stories. Maybe I'll have to try another spot next time. Always curious if anyone actually sees something.
There is a historical farm near my hometown where it's rumored the owner committed murder. It's believed he was a well-respected man who acted as the local minister. He once told the congregation that he was better off preaching to rocks, so he put a bunch of stones in the pews and preached to them. On to the murder. He supposedly impregnated his daughter. He was so mad at this that after the birth, he killed the baby and his daughter in the basement. A friend of mine swears she talked to a ghost of the girl when she was younger.
That story's pretty chilling. It's wild how history can hold such dark secrets. Sounds like the farm has some heavy vibes. I can see why your friend thought she spoke to the ghost. It's strange to think about the lives that might have been affected by that. Just adds another layer to the whole vibe of the place. Definitely makes you think about the stories behind old buildings.
Not really an urban legend, but here I go. We have kind of a big industry in my hometown based on winning/mining white sand. They say it's the purest in the world. Anyway, when they can't get any more sand, they just leave it behind, and that leaves a lot of lakes. People, well, adults, would always tell us about the quicksand people got stuck in/disappearing/dying. Now I'm older and I know there's no quicksand in most of these lakes, and nobody really ever died. It was just a means to keep children from going swimming there. 'Cause yeah, they're dangerous. No supervision, very big, very deep, and very cold.
That's interesting how stories evolve to keep kids safe. It's a classic move, really. I remember similar tales from my own hometown. Parents would spin stories about wild animals or hidden dangers to keep us from straying too far. We thought it was all true. As we grew up, it became clear those were just scare tactics. Makes you appreciate how much adults try to protect us, even if it's a bit exaggerated.
Munger Road, I live in a town that has haunted railroad tracks. Spooky, I know. Rumors say that if you stop on the track late at night and put baby powder on the rear bumper, you'll get pushed off the tracks. And when you go look at the powder, it'll have handprints on it. According to legend, a bus full of kids got hit by a train, and they don't want anyone else to get hit. They also made a movie about the tracks called Munger Road, which is a thriller.
I've heard about those tracks too. Friends and I thought it would be a good idea to check it out one night. We brought baby powder just to see if it was true. Nothing happened, but it was eerie standing there. You could feel the history in the air, and yeah, we definitely got freaked out a bit. It made for a memorable story but didn't see any handprints. Classic.
I have two in my area, the glowing house. There is a house on State Line Road that divides Arkansas and Oklahoma. It sits on about 10 acres of land on a hill that is completely fenced off and posted. At night, you can clearly see the house has sort of a blue glow to it. There are absolutely no exterior or interior lights on. Also, the house is abandoned. Has been for as long as I can remember. Gravity Hill. There is a hill located nearby, don't recall the city off the top of my head, where a bus full of kids crashed and all were killed allegedly. Legend has it that if you go to the top of the hill, put your car in neutral, that you will remain at the top of the hill without moving backwards. People say it is the spirits of the children pushing the car up the hill to keep you safe. I have heard some people say that they put baby powder on their back bumper and will see little handprints afterwards.
The glowing house seems eerie. An abandoned place with a blue hue sounds like something out of a horror flick. I can imagine people getting curious and wanting to check it out, but it's probably safer to stay away. Then there's Gravity Hill, a real creepy story there. The idea of spirits helping cars up the hill is kind of haunting, but also interesting. Some legends stick with you, and this one definitely does.
There are houses here that have been around since the incorporation of the town. They're well over 100 years old, and they were all built in the same style. All of them are currently occupied by families and have been remodeled. There is one house, though, where the owners live in a separate house on the property and has been unable to be sold in the last 20 years or so because rumor has it that the place is haunted. Apparently, anyone who has lived there in the past never stayed for more than a week or so before they had to leave. I pass by it almost every day, and I wish I had the money to buy it and remodel the place. I hate to see a place with that much history going to waste.
That house sounds interesting. It's kind of sad to see a place with a lot of history just sitting there. The haunted part adds another layer, though. You'd think someone would want to take a chance on it. I get the urge to buy it and give it new life. It's cool how places with stories can make you feel like you need to save them. Makes you wonder what happened inside.
I live in Worthington, Ohio. In our town, we have the legend of the White Bride. Supposedly, in the late 1800s, a wedding was being held in our town square. Through a series of unfortunate events, a horse and buggy ran wildly across the village green and into the wedding party. The bride was instantly killed. Now, the legend goes, if you go to the village green on the anniversary of the tragedy, you can hear the gallop of horse hooves and the scream of the bridge as she was run down. It's a big thing for the kids in our town to gather on the green on this night and see if they can hear it.
Sounds like a classic ghost story. It's interesting how these legends tie into local culture. I can see why kids would gather for that. There's something compelling about trying to connect with the past, even if it's just for a thrill. It's all part of growing up in a small town, sharing spooky tales and making memories. Worthington must have quite a unique vibe with that kind of history.
Indiana folk legend of the Blue Hole. Southern Indiana is prone to sinkholes due to limestone being weathered out from the previous ice age. This part is true, they are everywhere down here. The legend goes that there is a blue hole, a sinkhole filled with crystal blue water, the kind you find when a quarry floods. Legend goes that no one has ever reached the bottom because it separates into an elaborate underwater cave, even after professional dives. Some teens drowned in the blue hole and their bodies were never found. The blue hole just swallowed them up. This one is mild compared to other Indiana legends, but geographically the blue hole is closest to where I am.
That's an interesting story. The Blue Hole sounds like a fascinating place with a lot of local history. It's always eerie when legends involve unexplained disappearances. It makes you think about the unknown beneath the surface. I guess those sinkholes really add to the mystery of the area. It's wild to imagine something so beautiful can also be so dangerous. Those kinds of stories definitely stick with you.
My high school was actually built on top of an ancient Indian burial site, and a murder took place in it back in the 50s. About 15 years ago, they rebuilt the school by pretty much building the new school on top of the old one and burying it and sealing it off. As such, it is believed that the ghost of the girl who was murdered and the girl who murdered her roamed the halls of the abandoned school, empowered with the spiritus of the ancient Indian burial site, waiting for their moment to attack the school. Along with that, they were blamed for everything bad that happened in the school.
That's a pretty wild story. High schools often have their share of rumors and legends, but this one takes the cake. A ghost story mixed with history and a murder? That's something you'd expect in a horror movie. It's strange to think about how the past can still linger in places. Makes you wonder if there's truth behind those hauntings and if the spirits are just waiting for someone to notice them.
High school I went to was supposedly Gestapo interrogation center during the Nazi occupation of Czech Republic. School is in Prague. Rumors ran around schoolmates that many rooms, now classrooms, were used for very violent interrogations and/or executions, including schoolyard where kids now play sports. After graduation or during senior year, can't remember exactly. I found out that the building actually was Gestapo station during war, but the part about executions is unclear. No records made or destroyed records, but given the nature of former tenants, it is maybe more true than rumor. Another legend around this was that Nazis started renovating the building and added new wings to it so it would look like swastika from aerial view, but never finished it before the end of war. Though that one seemed more unlikely, since you need to use a lot of imagination to see swastika from aerial view. It was certainly spooky during the 6 years I went there.
That school story is pretty wild. Imagine going through classes in a place with such a dark history. It's strange to think about kids playing sports where serious stuff once happened. The whole renovation idea is interesting too, even if it sounds a bit far-fetched. Just shows how history can linger in places, making you feel a bit uneasy. Definitely adds a unique vibe to the school experience.
There is an old 10th century castle, think military outpost, not fortified housing for the local noblemen. It is said to be cursed and turns anyone who lives there into an evil bandit. Turns out this comes from the fact that the noble family that had it built turned to a life of pillaging about 3 generations later, around 1050, and was therefore crushed by the Dukes of Burgundy, who didn't really like their noble families to mess with their territories. Afterwards, it was used to protect the valley of the Saône below and the real castle of the Dukes that is still standing about 10 kilometers away. During the 18th and 19th century, the castle, now motley a ruin, housed hermits, mostly religious shut-ins, the last of whom were chased away by the locals after things went missing in random farms.
It's interesting how places carry their histories. I remember going to a similar spot, an old fort turned into ruins. The locals said it was haunted by the past cries of those who lived there. Some friends even claimed they saw shadows moving at night. We all joked about it. But honestly, I think the stories just add to the allure of these places. It's like they have secrets waiting to be uncovered.
There's this guy who used to work for a fast food restaurant, but one night he cut off his hand, and while going to the hospital he got hit by a bus. Now, every Tuesday night, he and his spatula hand haunts the restaurant. You'll know he's there because the lights will flicker, the walls will ooze green slime. And then finally, he gets you.
That's a wild story. A guy losing his hand and then getting hit by a bus sounds like something out of a horror movie. The idea of him haunting the restaurant is pretty creepy, especially with the flickering lights and green slime. I can imagine how that would freak people out who are just trying to grab a burger. This kind of makes you think twice about late-night fast food runs.
There's a cemetery in the area with a special feature on one of the graves. The coffin is under a large stone and suspended from above ground chains. So it sort of floats below ground level. You can supposedly see the coffin through cracks where the ground is settled around the stone. At one point, there was a bell or bells hung from the chains, but those are long gone. The purpose of this arrangement was that if the person was buried alive, their movement would make the bells ring, and they could be disinterred. The legend is that if you go there around the anniversary of the person's death, you can hear the bells ringing.
That grave definitely has an interesting story. I've always found cemeteries to have a certain vibe, you know? The whole idea of being buried alive is pretty creepy. The bells would have been a real lifesaver back in the day. I mean, can you imagine being stuck there? It's wild to think that if you go on the anniversary, you might hear something. People get really into those legends.
Not a creepy one, but a local legend slash myth slash what have you in Gainesville, Florida, is that Tom Petty, who grew up there, wrote the song American Girl about a University of Florida student who committed suicide by jumping off Beatty Towers. Beatty Towers are a pair of apartment-style dorm towers on the edge of U.S. campus. Southwest 13th Street, one of the busiest streets in the city, runs right next to the towers. The general name for 13th is U.S. Route 441. She can hear the cars roll by out of 441, like waves crashing on the beach. And obviously the lyrics are about a girl freaking out about whatever. Those lyrics plus local landmark equals urban legend. Petty categorically denies that's what the song is about. Beatty Towers dorms don't have balconies like it said in the song. And it's not even clear if a student living there committed suicide at that time, but Gainesville residents and UF students love to play it up.
That's an interesting local legend. Urban myths like that can really create a different vibe around a place. It's wild how a song can end up tied to a specific spot and story, even if the artist says otherwise. Beatty Towers definitely have their place in local lore. It's kind of a reflection of how communities remember and reinterpret events. People just lean into it, regardless of the facts.
When I was in grad school, there were all sorts of weird rumors about the bodies under the dorms. There's supposedly close to 500 of them, and the school would intensely deny that they were there, but one of my friends supposedly had seen all the files on the locations and whatnot because of an internship she was doing through the MLS program. Fast forward a few years, and a water main breaks under one of the dorms, and we suddenly have to deal with 300 graves they just found under the dorms. The state put up dorms directly on top of a cholera mass grave, which I'm assuming they must have known about.
That's a strange situation. The whole idea of living over a mass grave is unsettling. It's wild how the school tried to cover it up, only for it to come to light later on. I wonder how many other places have similar secrets. Your friend having access to the files makes it even weirder. Makes you think about the history beneath our feet. Definitely not something you expect from a college experience.
Well, it's not really an urban legend because nobody believes me, but I'm 90% sure it's real. Ghost Bus. So Ghost Bus is an unmarked bus that drives around randomly. I have yet to see Ghost Bus in its entirety. I only ever see it round corners, but when I round the same corner a minute later, it's gone. That I take the same buses constantly, yet only see it a handful of times, every time in a different place. I've stayed in the transit center for over an hour once, and never saw it stop there. I've seen silhouettes of people inside, but I never see anyone get on or off.
That sounds like a weird experience. I get what you mean about the ghost bus. I had a friend who claimed to see a similar thing. He swore he saw a train that never showed up on the schedule. Just like your bus, it had people in it but would disappear before anyone could get close. It's strange how these things seem real but never feel confirmed. Makes you wonder what's really out there.
The creature of Harrison Bay. I live about 15 minutes from Harrison Bay, which is just an area of a bigger lake in eastern Tennessee. Deeper into the bay, there's a nuclear power plant. Legend is a worker that was exposed to the radiation and accidentally fell into the lake. His body was never found. The radiation caused him to turn into this fish man-beast thing. He only preys on kids, and just before he pulls you under, he tickles your feet. I used this one to scare the shit out of my little brothers and their friends when they were younger.
That story about the creature in Harrison Bay is pretty eerie. I remember telling similar tales to my friends when we were kids. We'd sit around a campfire, sharing spooky legends. It was always a mix between fun and fear, especially when we started hearing strange noises from the woods. Your trick with tickling the feet is a classic move to get a good scare. Just a good way to mess with younger siblings.
There's a large park not too far from my old house. I still live in the same area, different house, where a story of a woman in the late 1990s who was walking through the back of the park on the way home fell through a hole and hit what appeared, when the dust cleared, to be an old carriage filled with Victorian clothing and bones. Basically, the urban legend is that when train carts in the 1900s used to be pushed by air, one of the tunnels collapsed inwards and they couldn't locate the train, so left it when they decided to redesign the whole system. After hearing this story, I have not walked through Crystal P. Park in years. It freaks me out. Some of the old entrance tunnels are still there as well. Eerie.
That's a wild story. Urban legends like that can really stick with you. I get why you wouldn't want to walk through the park anymore. Just imagining those tunnels and what might be down there is enough to make anyone uneasy. It's kind of strange how some places can carry that eerie vibe, even if they seem normal at first. Definitely gives you something to think about whenever you're nearby.
I live in Louisiana, so we have quite a few yarns to spin. My personal favorite is of the Chattawa monster in my hometown. The story goes that a circus train was coming along and derailed out in Chattawa. Now aboard this train was a variety of critters, but the most notorious of them was a freak. It was a cross between a man and beast, yet not quite either, and was terribly ferocious, so naturally, it was kept in heavy cage in its own rail car. When the train derailed, all the cars went into the woods and killed most of the animals save for a few monkeys that fled to the woods and this creature. Well, the story goes that should you take you a little ride out to the Chattawa Bridge in the dead of the night. You then kill your truck wait till the strike of 12. At first it get eerily quiet, then you'll start to hear a chittering and howling of monkeys. The branches of the trees start to sway and shake, and by the time you cut your truck back on there, he'll stand the Chattawa monster waiting for his next victim.
That's an interesting story. I've heard a few local legends, but this one is pretty unique. The idea of a circus train crashing and setting free such a wild creature really catches the imagination. The late-night vibe with the howling and chittering sounds intense. I could see how that would make anyone think twice about going out there at midnight. Just makes you wonder what else is out there in those woods.
I live in Lawrence, Kansas, home of the University of Kansas. On campus, there's a bell tower that, by tradition, you walk through on your way to graduating and receiving your diploma. According to legend, if you walk through the tower before you graduate, you'll never graduate. There's another legend with the bell tower. Anyone you kiss underneath the bells will be your future spouse.
That's an interesting place. The whole tradition around the bell tower adds a unique touch to graduation. It's kind of funny to think about the superstitions, like never graduating if you walk through early. And the kissing under the bells for a future spouse thing seems like a cute way to tie relationships to a special spot. It gives the campus a bit of character, for sure.
I live in a rural area. There is a very narrow gravel road out in the middle of nowhere with 2 or 3 abandoned houses on it. Everyone refers to it as Albino Road. Supposedly, there's a crazy albino that lives in one of the creepier looking houses. Teenagers drive by there all the time, hoping to catch a glimpse of the reclusive albino. While no one can actually say they have seen the albino, everyone knows a guy that had the albino come running at their car one night.
That sounds pretty eerie. I can relate to those rural legends. We had a similar situation in my hometown, where there was always talk about a haunted house. People would dare each other to go close to it. No one ever really saw anything, but the stories kept everyone curious and a bit scared. It's funny how these tales spread and become part of local lore.
The White Lady. Her name is Dorothy Southworth, and she died of a broken heart. She doesn't really do much besides roaming around the place. A road goes through what was previously her garden, and people have reported seeing her in their rear view mirrors as they've driven past. She resides at Salsbury Hall, UK, and it's allegedly one of the most haunted places in the UK.
That's an interesting story. Seems like Dorothy really left a mark, even in death. I mean, a broken heart can do a lot, I guess. The idea of seeing her in your rear-view mirror is pretty eerie. Salsbury Hall must have quite the atmosphere, with those stories floating around. It's always wild to think about what places we visit might have some sort of lingering presence.
Antonio's Pizza in the South Bay area of LA is deemed a mystery. The place was extremely successful, enough so that the owner and his son had multiple homes in Palos Verdes Estates and the Palisades. Then one day, it shut down, and the building is still there and payments still go in. Up until recently, it was a mystery, and some proles speculated that it was a front for laundering money.
Not long ago, I heard about this pizza joint in South Bay called Antonio's. Everyone thought it was doing great, but then it just shut down. The owner and his son had flashy homes, but it raised questions when the payments kept rolling in. Some locals even speculated it might have been involved in money laundering. Kind of wild how a place can seem so successful and then just disappear like that.
My town was supposedly blessed by some Native Americans that would protect it from tornadoes. I won't say I believe in this sort of thing, but I've lived there for 23 years, and we have never been hit. The towns surrounding all have. Even the farm equipment dealer at the edge of town has been hit, but never within city limits. I used to take video with my cell phone of the National Weather Service radar, showing massive storms approaching the town and dissipating, or going in an angle where they slightly miss, or they will split. Very interesting stuff.
That's an interesting situation. It's kind of wild how your town seems to dodge the storms, while everything around it gets hit. Those videos must be something to look back on. Just shows how unpredictable nature can be. Can't help but think about the stories passed down, and whether there's something to it. Makes you curious about how places are affected so differently by the same weather.
Not know much an urban legend, as it is a mystery. Grew up in LaPorte, Indiana, and we had a female serial killer named Belle Gunness who was a Norwegian immigrant. You can Google her. I'm on my phone and can't link the story. She advertised in Lonely Hearts sections of tons of newspapers, asking for well-to-do suitors. This was in the late 1800s, early 1900s. She killed over 40 people, mainly for insurance money. Many suitors came, almost none made it out alive. She apparently killed her kids, too. When people started becoming suspicious, suddenly her farmhouse burned down. They found the corpse of a woman they eventually claimed was the body of Belle. But those who knew her said it could not possibly be her, as Belle was a large, imposing woman, and the corpse was off someone much smaller. Also, prior to the fire, she had gone to her banks and emptied the funds. There were sightings of her elsewhere in the country for years. People still come to town to investigate the crime. It's our town's only claim to fame. Sad face.
That story about Belle Gunness is wild. Growing up in a small town, you always hear about the local legends and mysteries. It's crazy how a person can blend into the community and pull off something so dark. The fact that the body was never really confirmed adds to the mystery. It's like even after all these years, the questions about her life and disappearance still linger. Makes you think about what might hide in plain sight.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.